Baldwin therefore filed a sanctions and contempt motion, which prompted Morrissey to violate the court's order a second time because she also disclosed the contents of that motion to the press. Well, the motion isn't a grand jury hearing. That's a public record, the sanctions motion. So she's allowed to talk about that. And again, she's acting in response to the defense. Baldwin next submitted an alert letter identifying significant exculpatory and favorable witnesses and documents. So they claim, right? But we've already talked about that. Just because they think it's exculpatory and favorable doesn't mean it goes to the legal elements of the case or any defense, as well as jury instructions on the relevant offense and defenses. What they don't say here is that the defense crafted jury instructions that are inconsistent with the New Mexico standard jury instructions on involuntary manslaughter. Why would the defense do that? Because the actual standard jury instructions for involuntary manslaughter in New Mexico cook Alec Baldwin's goose. They cannot allow him to go to trial if the actual involuntary manslaughter jury instructions are going to be used, because he's done on the face, just like we talked about it. So they submitted modified jury instructions that would provide an escape hatch for their client. But those modified jury instructions don't reflect actual New Mexico law. So they submitted these jury instructions that they like, but don't reflect New Mexico law. They continue, but the state refused to present nearly any of that evidence to the grand jury, supporting its position with old case law. Is case law invalid because it's old? No. That had been overruled by the New Mexico Supreme Court and New Mexico statutory law. Yeah, I don't think any of that's true. What they might be doing is pointing at cases. Sometimes the case is reversed on certain elements and not other elements, and the one it's not reversed on remain valid law. The state also refused to read Baldwin's proposed charging instructions, that's the jury instruction we just talked about, to the grand jury, noting it would read a different instruction about intervening cause, even though the state's preferred instruction stated that it did not apply in homicide cases, and would not read an instruction about involuntary manslaughter that deviated from the uniform jury instructions, the standard jury instructions. The reason they didn't read the proposed jury instructions is because they're not actual New Mexico jury instructions. The reason they didn't read the intervening cause language the defense asked for is because the defense actually presented language that talked about preceding causes, intervening causes, not subsequent intervening causes. There can be no preceding intervening cause. The whole point of intervening cause being a defense is that you did some action that could create legal liability, but no harm would have resulted but for someone else doing something first, in intervening subsequent act. So I don't know what that would be here. Maybe Alec Baldwin cocks the hammer, presses the trigger, and Assistant Director David Hall mentally moves a bullet into the chamber of the gun so that it fires. I mean, there's no possibility. There is no time for an intervening cause here between the moment the gun is discharged and the bullet strikes Helena Hutchins. Let's see. The state, therefore, the prosecution filed a motion seeking permission to disregard Baldwin's alert letter because it was full of nonsense. The court denied the state's motion with respect to the evidence. The court ordered the state to make nearly all the favorable evidence and witnesses available to the grand jury. Guess what actually happened? It was all made available to the grand jury. It was offered to the grand jury members. It turns out they decided they weren't interested in looking at it, but it was made available.